Hello, friends of the Bridegroom. I'm Laura Ercolino, the host of The Bridegroom Speaks, and I'm here today with Father Ryan Mann from the Diocese of Cleveland. Good afternoon, Father. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. Would you just tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure. My name is Father Ryan Mann, and I'm the pastor at St. Basil the Great in Brecksville, Ohio, a diocesan priest of 10 years in the Diocese of Cleveland. And I've been the chaplain for numerous courses at the Theology Body Institute, as well as the JP2 Healing Center. I've been the chaplain for Culture Project missionaries. I think if you go on the Theology Body Institute website, they call me a professor, but that's incredibly lavish phrase for what I've done for them. So I don't think that's me, but regardless, I'm also the chaplain of Retrovi, which is a ministry for healing married couples in the Diocese of Cleveland. And my favorite thing to do is really to speak on what does it mean to be human and the encounter with Christ. And before I was a priest for a little bit, I was a professional jazz musician and a comedian. And that kind of gave me my love of humanity, I think. Grew up with a dad who was an agnostic Jew. So Judaism was in the home somewhat, more Yiddish phrases and food than anything else, but it was there. And my mom was kind of a lapsed Catholic, and they got divorced when I was 18. And so for my dad's first marriage, I have a half brother and half sister who are great people up in Michigan. They're both married or both have great kids. My nieces and nephews up there, and then I have a stepsister who lives down the street as well from my dad's current marriage. So I know the modern family well. I know all the bumps, bruises, and blessings that come with it in my own heart, mind, body, and soul, as well as in the family dynamic. And so I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us. And thank you for sharing about your family. That kind of leads me right into what I was hoping to talk to you about today, was about this idea of how Christ the Bridegroom wants to come to us, in particular in our age, with the particular wounds that we all experience in this culture, that he wants us to know him as the bridegroom. You know, that's an ever ancient yet ever new title for Christ, right? And a lot of people, when I start telling them about Christ the Bridegroom and that I'm a spouse to the bridegroom, they're like, where did that come from? That I never heard of that before. But I think it's really true that he wants us to know that he's not just the bridegroom of all of humanity, the bridegroom of the Catholic Church, the bride of Christ, but he wants to be the bridegroom of every soul. And in particular in our time, because of the wounds that our hearts are experiencing. And so I would love for you, with all of your knowledge of theology of the body and Retrovi and all the work that you've done in ministry, if you could just speak into that for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and a kind of a provocative way of saying, like, in our time, and in many ways it kind of raises the question, like, how do we know these things, or what's special about this time versus other times, or things like that. And I think you can kind of just begin by just giving a quick little survey of just the history of things. And, you look at the 20th century, and Pope St. John Paul II said it's a century that began with more hope than almost any century in humanity due to technology. Mm-hmm. And halfway through, it was already the bloodiest in the records due to world wars. So there was a kind of a false hope that was sustaining people in the late 1800s based on technology and kind of scientific discovery. You can think, or before that, in the 1700 French Revolution and things of rationale, human effort alone, things like this, and beginning to reshape life, culture, humanity, everything in our own image and our own pursuits and our own ideas. And then, you get to the middle of the 20th century, world wars are over in some sense, and other wars are happening for us here in America, different kinds. And then you have, in the 60s, you have the sexual revolution and hippies and Woodstock and all those things that, whether you're old enough to remember it, or you've seen it on news, or you've looked at papers, or you've seen it on the internet or whatever, that had its own dynamics to it of chaos, in particular in the area of embodiment. What does it mean to be a body in this world? And if you're going to ask the question of body, you're going to ask the question of male and femaleness and attraction and desire. So you kind of got that in the background there. And then Vatican II happens, in some sense, unfortunately at that time, although we do have to claim providence, but maybe in America, Vatican II was seen through the lens of revolution. And so there became chaos even in the church. And, I think it's to be helpful to root a lot of this. Obviously, many of our understandings of bridegroom in this area comes from the writings of Pope St. John Paul II, who the bishops of the world were asked to write in, right before the Second Vatican Council on what the council should cover. And some bishops wrote in aliens. We should cover aliens, which I think some of my priest friends would love if we would have talked about that. But John Paul II said, with a century that began with so much hope, getting to the middle of it with such bloodshed, and then he says it raises a question of what is man? What does it mean to be human? Why did God make us this way? What is a realistic human hope? All these great questions. That really, obviously, we see later on, years later, he became the guiding voice to the Second Vatican Council in many ways in his writings. So I say all that just to get us to so what is this era and what are we needing and what is this all about? Well, I think the first thing is to say love can't be generic. A love of mankind is kind of needs to be nuanced, because really you don't feel love when you feel like just a subset. I'm loving Laura because she's a woman. It's like, well, that's not, I mean, in one sense, okay, but it's like, you're not any woman, you're you. And so I have to know something of you to love you. Part of it, I have to see your face or hear your voice, or at least know something about you as before we've never met before, but I've known about you. So I've known the good that has come through your heart. I know people that your ministry and prayers and sacrifices have blessed. And so I know something of the goodness that is you. And so to love you, that has to be taken into consideration as I make a gift of myself to you on this, even an interview. So love is personal. Love has, if we say, an intimate dimension. We start using these phrases like personal and intimate and knowing the person. We're starting to get very close to what we say is spousal imagery in many ways.
Yes.
And so the era of the bridegroom is an era that is trying to heal the loneliness of being one in a million. They're just like, oh, I'm just another number. I'm just a part of humanity. I'm the effect of a personalist like evolution, where I don't really matter. I'm just a random byproduct due to science and nature. And the bridegroom comes to say, if I'm a bridegroom, I'm loving you with an exclusivity.
Yes.
That there's something about the way that Christ wants to give himself to us in his words, his eyes, his voice, his heart, his body, that says, this is for you alone. And that is incredibly healing on the deepest levels, where we go out to dinner and see families that are distracted. So here, sons and daughters are on their iPads, dads are on their phones, and mom's on her phone. And so there's no sense of, you are worthy of my time as a person. And so the increased needs of, am I good? Do I matter? What's more real about me? My awful mistakes or the good that I was told that God made me with? What's more real? Because sometimes one feels way more powerful. And
Yes.
The love of Christ as exclusive, intimate, and personal tends to awaken and heal us and gives us a sense that I'm in his eyes. I discover the truth that I am a gift, I am wanted, and that I'm a gift to be given. And first to him, he wants me to give myself back to him. And then through that union, he'll guide me to give myself to others. So I want to say some of that at the outset.
Thank you. Yes, that's beautiful. And that's something that, in our ministry at Hope's Garden, to women who have experienced spousal abuse and trauma, relational trauma and trauma in their marriages in particular, or relationships with men. That's one of the things I think that Christ as the bridegroom is really healing in them. That idea, I know it was part of my healing process with Father Michael, very much from my childhood abuse and then abuse in my marriage. I very much thought, I don't matter. I don't matter. I'm just an object. As long as I make other people happy, then I'm safe. But other than that, I don't matter. And to find out how much I matter to Jesus changed everything. And it was through learning to just let him love me that exactly what you just said happened, that I learned that I am a gift and I do have something to offer to others, and that he wants this I-thou relationship. And if I say I don't matter, I'm nobody, well, then who is it that he's saying I love you to? There has to be a me. There has to be someone. And so it was through letting him love me that I learned who I am. And to me, that's, I was told that that in a spousal relationship, the spouses are supposed to help one another to become the man and woman that God created them to be. And when you have abuse and neglect in a marriage, that's not happening for either spouse, right? And it was coming to know Christ as my bridegroom that really helped me, I think, to begin. I think it's a lifelong process becoming the woman that he created me to be. But I feel like now I'm on that path.
Yeah, Laura, as you say that, I believe it's Theology of the Body, paragraph 25. Don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure it is. John Paul II wrote something that really helped me in my own seminary life and priesthood still. And he basically talks about that the sin that we have experienced of others and of our own is not as deep as God's original plan. And he says, Christ's words reactivate that original plan.
Wow.
So maybe I can translate it because he's a Polish pope and he's writing a doctoral level thesis. And if someone maybe zoned out and said, what did that priest just say? So maybe we could say it this way is deep inside of you are the echoes of the Garden of Eden. Jesus turns that little echo into full volume. His words reactivate it and give it a real power in our own identity and our way to live. Now, it's key here that Christ does that.
Yes.
It's not just navel gazing or self-reflection or journaling, although that actually those skills are indispensable to learn how to look at yourself and sit with things and reflect and connect the dots and be willing to engage in very difficult parts of our lives. Using our energy and life in that way is really important. In fact, that's what grace is trying to do in us. But ultimately, it needs to be held open to him so that he has a space to begin to awaken. And so, you can hear in these words maybe like a biblical imagery of him saying, Lazarus, come out. Or in the Song of Songs, open to me. Pope Benedict said the whole gospel could be summed up in the word ephatha, which is where Jesus says that to the deaf man. It says, be opened. And the idea is to what? Well, be opened to the gift of Jesus wanting to not take your place, but actually to redeem, retrieve, regain, restore you to what? God's original plan. And so Christopher West is probably the best communicator of theology of the body, but he uses the imagery where I'm grabbing a sheet of paper. He uses this imagery where he holds up a sheet of paper and he draws a man and woman. And he says, this is man and woman in glory in the Garden of Eden before sin. And everyone goes, ooh, ah. And he says, and this is sin. And he crumples it up. This is such a great image by Christopher West because we're born feeling this way. And then people do this to us. Whether it's a spouse, a family member, a boss, a coach, a teacher, a kid, anyone, make us feel this way. And when we feel this way, we think holiness is throw this out because it's trash. What the gospel is we don't delete this, we unpack it. And as you begin to undo it, you begin to see God's original plan again. That's what holiness is. Holiness is someone who has willingly opened up the fig leaves where the pain and hurt are at, and the lies that we believe about ourselves and God and others reside. We open it to Jesus, and he begins to lovingly clean it up and awaken even something deeper, namely those original identities and desires that lead us to God and to one another. And we would never open up if Jesus's love wasn't the tenderness and the self-surrendering love of a bridegroom to a bride. And that's why the era of the bridegroom is ultimately an era. We're recording this, we're waiting for a new pope. Francis has just died. So when everyone's watching this, when did they record it? It's in that weird time. But Pope Francis said it all the time. It's a revolution of tenderness. I love that word. Now, there's some nuancing, but regardless, the tenderness here is that a bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not extinguish. So like when you're in love, boy, you love the way that their eyelashes move and the color of their eyes and every little detail. That's how Jesus looks at you. He delights And his tenderness and patient, indulgent, mercifying love gives the heart permission to open. And as it opens, what happens is the lie pops up that I'm crap, I'm bad, I'm only an object. That pops up, and underneath it is a little dawning of the sunrise of, well, maybe I'm not that. Maybe I'm something else. And that's the beauty of the journey.
And that's the beauty of coming to see, to know him, to encounter him, because it's not a knowing, it's not knowledge. You could read all the books and theology of Christ as the bridegroom, and that's not it. It's not, and that's part of it, but it's encountering him. He wants a heart-to-heart encounter with us. He wants that intimacy. I next to my bed, I have a giant picture of the Sacred Heart of Jesus that I bought on the TOB pilgrimage to Guadalupe. And he's holding his heart out in his hand. And every morning and every night, that's the first and last thing that I look at. And I speak to Jesus and his heart. And I thank him for this intimacy that God himself allowed his heart to take on human flesh and be pierced for me, for each one of us. And then he stands there and says, see my heart. You know, you hear people say intimacy, see into me, see. And I think, this is what he's saying to all of us. The bridegroom is holding his heart out and saying, I've opened mine to you. Come, you can come. You can come through my wounded side and crawl into my pierced heart where you're safe and loved, and then open your heart to me. That's intimacy. And the image of the Sacred Heart where he's holding it out in his hand just it pierces my heart again and again every day, that this is my bridegroom.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful, Laura. Yeah, it's interesting because we're in an era of the bridegroom, and we're in an era of evangelization. We talk about it constantly. And, you know, missionary disciples are buzzwords and things like this. And it's interesting because really the mission of the church is to be bride.
I was going to say, if we're in the era of the bridegroom, that means we're also in the era of the bride. Right.
Yeah. So it's like, so can you witness to the world of a love that is stronger than death and for you by name? John Paul II in Theology of the Body also says, by the fact of our creation, each of us is in a unique, unrepeatable, and exclusive relationship with God. Yeah. So there's something about, even though Hope's Garden is for anyone who feels drawn and called to this, there's something about Christ the Bridegroom speaking to Laura that's going to be different than anyone else at Hope's Garden. Yes. And, you know, we didn't say this, but I love the name Hope's Garden because this is the place where hope grows. Right? So if you're part of Hope's Garden, it's not like you have hope fully formed, but you're in the place where hope will grow. And hope grows, we're in the year of hope, hope grows to the degree that we can be loved in places where despair currently is growing. If you allow love to enter where there's despair, love can transform that. And then what grows in its place is hope, because, oh, I'm not alone here. I can be met here with understanding and a different gaze of joy, and someone can believe in me here. And now what happens is this upward movement of little sprouts of hope. And then that, of course, that hope needs nourished in community and prayer and sacraments like this. But it is to say that what makes hope grow is to be loved in the places where I'm most unlovable, and the places that are the most shameful and painful. Another image of that is called the cross. And I think that's the first thing that dawns on me is, if we're in the era of the bridegroom, it's because the thing that is most trampled, shameful, and seemingly God-forsaken is sex and sexuality, both as a verb and a noun. It's a place of fear and confusion. It's a place of powerlessness and shame, regret and scandal. Sounds like a tagline of a really tantalizing movie. But it's like, this is where all that happened, was in that area. That's also what the cross is. It's a place of darkness, confusion, powerless, shame, abandonment, wounds. And that's precisely where Christ goes. Where? As the bridegroom, saying, this is my body given for you. St. Augustine calls it the marriage bed of the cross, right? Which, you first hear that and you go, I don't know if that's any marriage bed I want. And I'm okay. Maybe a water bed back in the day. This is kind of crazy. But what it means, though, is, right, like, this is where he gives himself to be one with you. He loves being one with you in your gifts and shining moments, but he actually really wants to become one with you where you are feeling shame, abandoned, darkness, confusion, overwhelmed. And as perfect love touches these dark places, these tombs are transformed into wombs. Despair becomes hope. Loneliness becomes love. And all of a sudden, we have the new life of resurrection.
Great.
And
Some gardens, right?
yeah, exactly. And so that's the bridegroom where does the resurrection take place? And they think he's the gardener, because where was man and woman originally created? In a garden. Where they're going to be recreated? By the divine gardener for the garden, which is paradise. So it's all the biblical themes are there for sure in this era.
And it's all in the Song of Songs. And even this idea of the new evangelization and an era of evangelization takes me back to the bridegroom in the song, because this is, I always think, if everyone could just fall in love with him, encounter him as the bridegroom and fall in love with him, like evangelizing would be so easy. Like I've said in my prayer to him, why don't you just let everyone have a glance at your beauty? Like, like hear your sweet voice. In the song, it says his conversation is sweetness itself. And I just think, if everybody could just really encounter you like that, we wouldn't have to work so hard at evangelization, Everyone who would not fall in love with him, but people reject him and don't fall in love with him. And that's why he needs us who are in love with him to be like the bride in the Song of Songs. Draw me in your footsteps. Let us run. Let your sweet perfume come off of me, so that the maids, the maidens and the young men will just follow me, because like John of the Cross says, they'll want to see you too. They'll want to know where you are and to find you, And so I think it all, it's something we really emphasize in our courses and book studies, that it all begins, we say it's healing of hearts first, then marriages, and then families, because every heart first has to be healed and fall in love with Christ. And if we arrive in all our other relationships, knowing that we're already loved by the bridegroom, allowing him to pull out the weeds of all those lies that I don't matter and I'm worthless and I'm an object, let him, the divine gardener, get in there and do his thing. Then we can arrive in our other relationships knowing that we're already loved, and he will fill us to overabundance. He always fills us to overabundance, right? So his love pours off of us. And now we don't have to, like Adam and Eve, grasp for what we need and want, because we've already been given it by our divine bridegroom. And so now it's easier to love the other fallen, wounded people in our lives. And I love just to go back for a minute, because my mind is spinning with all that you've said, the crumpled paper image. I love that. And, I know listeners on a podcast can't see it, but do it. Take a piece of paper and crumple it up like Christopher West does, and then try to smooth it out again. It will never be perfectly flat and without creases. And that reminded me of how when the Lord was first healing me, and I was doing EMDR therapy and all kinds of art therapy, so much trauma therapy, it was ridiculous. And I wanted him to just heal me and sweep all those years under the rug. Okay, we can be done with that now, right? Let's get on with the rest of my life. And he was like, no. That is not the way I do things. And if you look at that crumpled paper, our brokenness and distortions and lies, they're never fully gone. They're still a part of our story. But I think what's so amazing about the bridegroom, and to go back to the garden image, we talk about this a lot at Hope's Garden, that all of that trauma and the lies and all that muck, it's the fertilizer. Think about what we fertilize gardens, manure, right?
Yeah.
So the bridegroom's not like, oh, let me just take that and get rid of it. He's like, no, we're going to use that, and new life is going to come right from there. And to me, that is redemption. He does more than just heal those wounds. He redeems them by bringing good right from our abyss of misery, our muck.
Yeah, I love that. And that redeem, to call Jesus the Redeemer was John Paul II's one of his favorite titles. He uses it more than other popes and theologians. And I think it's because he really wanted us to realize that, he was regaining something for us.
Yeah.
It wasn't a brand new thing. He had already created us. And
Yeah.
he was redeeming. We were redeemed one way, something happened, and now we were being redeemed. And yeah, it's when I teach young adults, sometimes I tell them, we would love to have our life in volumes. Like volume one was all my crazy college years.
Yeah.
Okay. But volume two was when I encountered Christ and I started living this beautiful life. I go, but there's only one book. It's just your story. And in everyone's stories, there's sorrowful mysteries and joyful mysteries and glorious mysteries. And there's parts of our stories that we have forgotten that are really determining us that we need to regain and bless. There's parts of our stories that are beautiful and we cling to probably too much. But the reason we can love a sinner is because we're made of the same stuff. So thanks be to God, I haven't had some of the traumas that I've worked with people to heal from, some of their sexual traumas and wounds. Thanks be to God, mine looked very different, but it's like, well, I'm made of the same stuff. I mean, had I had your same experiences, I would struggle with your same things. It's because we're all made of the same stuff. And what's really remarkable to think about too is, and Jesus became our stuff. I mean, that's what St. Paul says, he who knew no sin became sin for us, right? So he took on our stuff. He had no need. He didn't gain anything. He was fine. He had the Father already. He just did it so that we could gain the Father, so that through our union with him, we would know the Father. And that was that's the bridegroom's greatest gift is, I want you to be a part of my family. Like, I want you to know my dad and my mom. Because when you become one with me, you're going to get them as your dad and your mom. And they're my greatest gift I can give you. And so pouring out of his heart is a relationship of, adoption, sonship, daughtership. So you join a family either through being born, adopted, or marriage. So baptism is being born and adopted, and then marriage is the other way. So both imagery and scripture is simply to say, through Christ, we're a part of this. And that bridegroom imagery in this era, in this time, is using the very thing that is most trampled, and usually the thing probably the most confusing and obstacle for people to know the church and really live our teachings. That's the very way he wants to come to us, as if to say, in new ways, the light shines in the darkness. It is darkness right before dawn, all those beautiful images. But yeah, I think the thing I just wanted to maybe say to any listeners is, a really good bridegroom is also very patient. I think that's so important. The people I walk with, they really want healing quickly. Oh my gosh, who am I saying? I also want it quickly, but I'm just aware of the people I'm ministering to. Maybe a super masculine or spiritual father, I'm thinking externally more, but yeah, they want it. They want the zapping.
Yeah.
And one of the things Jesus wants to communicate is, long before you're someone who needs healing, you're just someone to me. And being someone to me is, I cherish you. Not because you're going to get healed or you're going to say yes or go to confession one day or he's not looking to get anything out of it. You just are that to him. And if he fixes you too quickly, you may start identifying with wound. Oh, I was this and now I'm that. We always hear people tell that conversion story over and over and over again. You're like, hey, that happened to you 40 years ago and nothing else has happened. And it's because Jesus's love is not dependent on your wounds, but it is accommodating to them. But his patience is a way of communicating, you're worth the wait because you're worth everything to me. You're worth everything. And that's what the crucifix says is this word, you're worth, that's what bridegroom, you're worth my whole life. You're worth everything.
Yes. And that patience and tenderness, those are two of my favorite words to describe how I've come to know Christ the Bridegroom. That he is patient and he is tender. And in this era of the bridegroom, and then like we just said, that also means, and it just hit me as we were talking, well, then it also means it's the era of the bride. But I think what's really important, and this ties back into evangelization, is that, Teresa of Avila said he has no feet, no hands here now, except for us, right? Well, I always think he has no heart or eyes here on earth anymore, except for us. And so once we encounter him and his patience and his tenderness, then that's our call, is to then be his patience and his tenderness. And that's him redeeming the image of the bridegroom also, I think, helping us to come to understand, what does it really mean to be a holy bridegroom, to be a holy bride, to have a holy marriage? It doesn't mean perfection, right? But it means that we're striving to live Christ-centered and to live in as an icon of the bridegroom.
Yeah, I think it's something, I'm paraphrasing maybe, but in the Catechism says something, holiness is the perfection of love. So it's not a moral perfection, but it's a perfection of love. You can still love greatly and be immoral. Hence, part of love is you hurt people and you're willing to repair, and you're willing to take ownership of that, or you're willing to forgive if someone hurts you. I mean, these are parts. So you can be very, very holy and still struggle with immorality and other things. But I think what you said is something really important, is because you mentioned it kind of offhandedly, but it's super important to kind of bring to the explicit, is that you wouldn't be where you are without Father Michael.
Oh, no, I would not.
And the reason I say that is just that other people are not a means to an end. It's not like if you get really, really holy, you won't need people in your life to share life with. There's no such thing as thriving or flourishing or wholeness apart from relationships.
Isn't that John Paul II and the Catechism and Vatican II, that man becomes himself as he gives the gift of himself, right? I know that's not the exact quote, but
that's basically it. Yeah,
and relationship.
And one of the gifts we give is receiving another. One of the greatest gifts you can give to someone is to receive them, because in receiving someone, they feel like a gift. And so when they feel like a gift, they want to give more. And as you receive more, they give more. And then as you're receiving, they're receiving, you're receiving. And so the giving and receiving is a cyclical thing. But
yes,
the reason I say that is there can be a disembodying of Christ the Bridegroom as well. If we're saying Christ the Bridegroom, we're specifically talking about an embodied experience. And that means that love takes on flesh. And so in order for you to name and face some of the things in your life, numerous things had to happen. But one of them is you had to be able to have someone who could offer you a safe enough place where this could come to the surface. Now, ultimately, Jesus is the most safe and prayer is the place. Right. But we don't use people to then get to prayer, but rather people are a part of the whole mystery of life. God, others, self, it's all involved. And I think that's really important, that we all have had people in our lives who've looked at us with love, and people have given us that chance to be safe. And it's like, the heaven is not just us and Jesus. It's the whole communion of saints, right? So I joke with people, like, if you're not good at relationships, you better get real good at it. And another way of saying that is we have to get good at love. And love is a mutual exchange where you bring something into my life I don't have on my own. Yes, gifts and talents, but particularly just Laura. Like, I don't have Laura in my life, that you're you. So by you're entering in, you're bringing something into my life I don't have on my own. And so I can open to receive that. That's part of love. And then I can give myself to you in numerous ways. And you receiving that is to the part of love. So love is a mutual exchange and that's what creates communion. That's the fullness of love. And that gives us a little glimpse of the communion of saints. And so we got to get good at that now, because that's what eternity is. And if we have in our hearts that sense of like, oh, I don't want to be around people, it's like, well, heaven's not going to look that attractive to you. And so, but the reason we ever would feel that way, the only reason we'd ever have an aversion to people and crowds, and either it's a woman having an aversion to men or men having an aversion to women, is because of wounds. And once again, we're back to the bridegroom, whose job isn't to just heal us so that we can go on with living our lives, but to draw us into intimacy. And in that journey of drawing, things get in the way that we have to stop and process. And then there's more drawing and then stopping and processing and all these things. And so, yeah, I don't know that I would have ever said we're in an era of the bridegroom, but it's becoming so explicit as we talk that, yeah, the qualities of a bridegroom are really what make this era very, very obviously an era of communion. All right, I'm going to quote him again. Pope St. John Paul II, in his document on the third millennium, says that the church needs to become the home and school of communion if it is to carry out God's will and respond to the world's deepest yearnings. Now, I'm not like a savant with quotes. I give talks all the time, and that's a quote I use every talk. Don't think I'm some sort of weirdo. But or you can, just for other reasons. But it's a like the home and school of communion. That's what the church is meant to be, because the church is bride, and the church receives Holy Communion every time she says yes to Christ.
And isn't that John Paul II also, who said that holiness is the bride's response to the gift of Christ, to the gift of the bridegroom, which is himself?
Yeah, I think he says faith is, just to be clear. I don't want any I don't want any nitpicky people putting comments on the bottom of our podcast, Laura. Okay. But he says faith is openness to the gift of the bridegroom to the bride.
That takes me to the Eucharist. We were talking about the giving, and I think it's in TOB, the giving and the receiving interpenetrate and become one. And when I realized, as I came to know Christ as the bridegroom, and he healed, like you said, step by step, took those little things out of the way, and we had to stop and heal something else. And I began to see it now as it's like every day an adventure. All right, Jesus, what else are we going to discover in my heart? What are you going to do in there today? Because every time he does that, and I can hand him another piece of my heart that was still in the dark or still broken, that's another place now he can give me more of himself. I think that's part of it's this union that he wants with us, right? So he has to clear out all that gunk in there, so there's more room for him, so he can give us more love of himself. And when I realized that when I'm walking up to receive communion, I'm walking up as his bride to receive my bridegroom in this intimate one flesh, one spirit union, and that he delights, just like you were saying, he delights that I'm coming up with love to receive him with faith as his bride, that he's delighted in my receiving him. My receiving him becomes gift. When we ask, how can I console him? What can I give to him? That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, two things that stand out as you say that, Laura, is the first one is one of the questions I've heard before is both Mother Teresa and me receive the Eucharist. Why does it produce a Mother Teresa in her when she receives the Eucharist and not when I receive it? And the answer is the depth of vulnerability, or the how much dependence and trust she expressed to him. That dependence, that littleness, that poverty, that openness, that trust, that vulnerability, use whatever word you want, is what is in relation to that is how much the Eucharist can affect us. And that's, and that makes true, that's very obvious in the imagery of a bride and bridegroom, right? It's how much can your husband really love you? Well, to the degree that you let yourself be loved. And conversely, to the degree that he's sharing actual love. But they go together. There's some marriages where the husband is pouring himself out and she is closed off, right? So it can go either direction. The other thing you said earlier was hearts, marriages, family, right? That order. And what I want to tell people is you're not giving a formula or making it linear. You're just giving a matter of primacy. And the reason I say that is I know sometimes we can all fall into the trap of once I get my heart, fill in the blank, then I'll start engaging the marriage stuff and say, well, actually, as you begin to try to work on your marriage and family, your heart stuff will become very evident.
Yes.
And as you work on your heart stuff,
that way.
yeah. And as you try to work on your heart stuff, it will also be very clear where, this issue is why I'm like this to my spouse or why I'm like this to my kids. So it's all connected, but the foundation where it all becomes one in a person is the heart.
Right. And the idea that, because very often we become aware of issues because we tend to look outward, right? And say, well, there's something wrong with this person. And we think that's the issue. But what we always have to do, Christ wants to work in our heart. He said to look at the log in your own eye, right? Love the catechism, the beginning of part 4, where it has the definition of the heart, that the heart is the place of covenant. This is why we have to be willing to look at our own stuff, to look at the darkness and mess in our own hearts too, because that is the place of union with Christ.
Yeah, and maybe that's a great place to stop for a pause for a minute to talk about that. Is like, it's very difficult to live in the heart. We can almost define the modern era as the running away from the human heart. It's vulnerable. It doesn't move at the pace of a text message. It's interior and quiet. In order to get really in touch with the heart, it can be very boring.
Scary, lonely.
Yeah, totally. And it's and if you've taken some hits in life, you'll get this because you're in this area. I always tell people, getting into your heart feels like walking in East Cleveland at night. Those of you who don't understand, East Cleveland is a very rough neighborhood in Cleveland. And it can be things you've avoided, but it's in Gaudium et Spes. It says, when man enters his heart, he enters into the deepest reality, and God who loves him awaits him there.
Wow.
That's a great quote on the heart. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and
that is.
I used to give parish missions. My whole first night was on the heart, and that quote I'd unpack that for like 10 minutes, that quote.
Yeah.
But I think it's very helpful to hear that when you enter your heart, it's the deepest place of reality. You're not escaping and running away. You're actually descending into the place where all of your experiences have meaning, where what they mean to you has been conveyed. And now you're feeling all of that. And good news, it's also God who probes the heart. That's it. It's God who probes the heart, waits for you there.
Wow.
So the one who knows your heart and explores it with you, that's where he's at. And so you've done this when you've walked with people, but a lot of times when I'm doing spirit direction or confession, people say, I feel so far from God, I don't know where he is. I won't engage the God question. I'll engage the heart question. I'll say, are you upset at anyone, scared, anything hurtful recently, or what's going on? And all of a sudden we start talking about their heart, and then pretty soon we're in a place that they just didn't want to admit or accept about them. And sure enough, God's very real all of a sudden. So it wasn't God who was far away as much as they were separated from their own heart. And they needed, once again, that human experience of being loved and cared for to process and metabolize some things in order to get in touch with the place where, as it says in the Catechism, the heart is where I really dwell, to get in touch with where they really are. And in doing that, they find God. And in there, they find the place of covenant. The word covenant always means marital. And so the place of spousal union, bridegroom, bride, intimacy, fruitfulness, etc.
Yeah. The bridal chamber. Yeah. It's, maybe I feel like we could talk about this all day, but I don't maybe we can schedule to do another one, because I really am going to go and pray tonight. My prayer is all going to be about the era of the bridegroom and the bride.
Oh, nice. I'm glad that came out in our conversation. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think maybe someday we might have to come back and see what he wants us to talk about on that. But I would love, as we're talking about this journey into the heart, which I always joke with the women that, the longest, most arduous journey we go on is from our heads to our heart. It looks like a very short distance, but it can take a lifetime to really get down in there. And what I've also learned from St. Elizabeth of the Trinity is that it's in our heart that we discover the abyss of our own misery, whatever that is for you, right? And we often will turn away and say, forget it, I'm not going in there. But what I've experienced is, if I'm willing to go into the darkness in my own heart, into that abyss of misery, and I imagine like swimming down to the bottom of a dark ocean, right? That at the bottom of my misery, somewhere, he's not going to keep me swimming forever. Somewhere the abyss of my misery meets the abyss of his mercy. But we have to be willing to dive in, or we're not going to enter into the abyss of his mercy. And so if it's okay with you, I would love to end with a little reading from the Song of Songs.
Please.
Because in the Song of Songs, in chapter 5, you quoted a line from it earlier where he says, open to me. He's knocking on the door. And she says, oh, but I've already taken off my gown. Do I have to put it back on again? I've already washed my feet. Do I have to dirty them again? And she doesn't get up immediately and open to her bridegroom. And so then it seems that he's disappeared on her. When she does open the door, he's gone. And she goes out into the cities and the streets, and she ends up being abused by the watchmen, and she's seeking for him. And she comes upon her friends, the daughters of Jerusalem, and says to them, help me find him. And if you find him, just tell him I'm sick with love. That's all she can think of, is how sick with love. She's languishing. Some translations say she's fainting because she can't find her divine bridegroom, the lover of her soul. And so the chorus responds to her and says, what makes your beloved better than other lovers, O loveliest of women? What makes your beloved better than other lovers to give us a charge like that? And she has this beautiful speech, verses 5:10 through 5:16, and I'll just pick a couple lines, but it's a beautiful description of the bridegroom. But you'll notice she's not actually describing him in terms of a person. It's really more terms of the temple. And she says, my beloved is fresh and ruddy, to be known among 10,000. His head is golden, purest gold. His locks are palm fronds and black as the raven. His eyes are doves at a pool of water, bathed in milk, at rest on a pool. His cheeks are beds of spices, banks sweetly scented. His lips are lilies, distilling pure myrrh. His conversation is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovable. Such is my beloved. Such is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. Where did your beloved go, O loveliest of women? Which way did your beloved turn so that we can help you look for him? Now they want to know this bridegroom too. And this is what brings me back to having the courage to go into our own hearts where he dwells. Because I can see in my head now when I read this part of the song, the bride who was frantic and fainting, languishing for love, suddenly stopping and saying, wait a minute. He's right here. I left. He never left. And she says, my beloved went down to his garden, to the beds of spices, to pasture his flock in the gardens and gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He pastures his flock among the lilies. It's all about the heart, right?
Yeah. And I just want to name, just to end, I don't want to end on anything other than that beauty, but I'm going to. The very beginning, when they're just like, the chorus is saying to them, like, who is this? Why do you think he's so much better than our lovers? Like, what the heck? I hope people who are listening to this can hear that that's the accusation of our culture to us. It's people who have been so hurt. People who are cynical. And the promise to see someone so in love and speak so highly of someone's love for them, the promise built into that is so beautiful, and yet touches upon so many disappointments and compromisings and settlings, that the reaction out of cynicism and always, who do you think you are? Like, why do you think you get this wonderful? Yeah, it'd be wonderful to know someone like that, but there's no way. Just bring your hope down. Just tamp down your desires. Just get by. Don't want so much out of life. And I end with this, because I end all my talks to anyone about this, is I'm one of the priests on the Albacete Forum. As far as my knowledge, I'm the only priest on the Albacete Forum of Monsignor Lorenzo Albacete. He was John Paul II's friend, a theological advisor. He founded the JP2 Institute for Marriage and Family in DC. He was head of Communion Liberation. He was a physicist, engaged, gave it all up to follow Christ, become a priest. Okay. And he tells this poem he borrowed from Luigi Giussani often, about the adventures of a snail. And this snail is going through the woods and sees these frogs and asks about the meaning of life, and they don't mock him. But he sees ants. And he sees all these ants tearing apart and murdering an ant. And the ant that's dying says, I climbed up on top of the tree and I saw stars. Stars exist. And the other ants are killing this ant, saying, you stopped working. You got out of line. We're ants. We're meant to work. And it says, as the snail went off confused, you heard church bells in the distance. This is a poetic imagery of the idea that our culture wants us to fit into a box. All right? Find someone that loves you, good enough, don't want too much out of life, tamp down those longings, those desires. But God is always sending stars. Whatever your stars are that awaken in you and make you want more out of life, that's God at work. And it's always connected to the bride. The church bells are ringing, always reminding us that the stars are connected to the love story where bride and bridegroom become one inside the church. And we're all invited into the wedding feast. And so I thank you for Hope's Garden and everything you do, Laura, and hope we can talk again.
Thank you, Father. Would you mind just ending us with a little prayer and blessing?
Happily. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Almighty God, most holy Trinity, Jesus, our bridegroom, teach us how to love and be loved. Give us all the grace to, in this moment, welcome the stars, however they show up, the ways of creation that you use to open us again in desire and hope. Breathe your breath of fire and spirit upon the church, that we would enter the intimate union, that the earthly man and woman union is but a pale glimpse of the infinite greater intimacy and union that you have for us in heaven, that you share with us in our hearts, and that gets embodied in the Eucharist. Bless this ministry and all who are listening today with peace through the intercession of the bridegroom heart of Jesus, the heart of Mary and Joseph and John Paul II. May God bless you all, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.